Hey everybody, Rosematter here, and welcome to my promised post-Umineko discussion video. Specifically, I asked you guys at the end of my Umineko playthrough to ask me questions about, my thoughts about Umineko, specific things you wanted to know, my opinions on, so I've compiled some of the questions here, and we're going to go through them, so without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, first question is my favorite and least favorite episode of Umineko, and it was hard to narrow it down. I had a pretty specific one I could say was my least favorite, and even then when I say least favorite, I don't think that there were any bad episodes of Umineko, but I would say my least favorite one, the one that was like a little bit more of a slog to read through because I found the pacing was not as good as the other ones, was episode 4. So that was the episode where it focused on Angie, and it would flip back and forth between like Angie in the past and then stuff going on in another timeline. And I found it not only confusing because we were going through multiple points of view, because we were like reading through as Angie, but then also there would be times where she would be reading Maria's diary, and then it would go to Maria's point of view, and it just, I don't know, the pacing was a little bit off. It wasn't as exciting. When things would start to kind of pick up, it would then like jump back over to like Angie in present time and then her in the past. And yeah, it was just confusing, and the pacing was a little off, but Angie's one of my favorite characters, so I still enjoyed learning more about her and everything that happened to her after the events. I found the pacing was a little bit less exciting, and jumping between the different like points of view was also threw me off a little bit. So that would be my least favorite episode. As for my favorite episodes, I would say tied between episode 5 and episode 7. Episode 5, the introduction of Erica, in my opinion, the best, question mark, however you want to call that, like the post-episode content, with like the epic battle between Badler, which I will talk about a little bit later once he finally comes to the truth. And Erica just being such a fun character, and she just kind of like, just as we started to get some semblance of an idea of what was going on, even then, I feel like that's being generous. They just throw this completely new character in to just disturb the shit, be the intellectual rapist. And while I found her annoying at times, I thought that she brought something fun to the story, and I just really found that episode a lot of fun to read through, and it just zipped by, and yes, really fun episode. And then episode 7, of course, is when we learn the backstory of Beatrice, of Sayo, Yasu, learning all sorts of information, and after going through like dozens and dozens of hours of not knowing what was going on, to finally get some answers was just very satisfying. And I really like the way that they did it as well, with episode 7, with the Beatrice's funeral, and like we got a lot of closure on a lot of characters as well, like learning more about them. So episode 7 was that moment where it was very cathartic, like, oh my gosh, I'm finally learning some stuff. And I gotta give a shout out to episode 1, because it was the beginning of everything. It's what got me hooked into the series. And yes, it started a little bit slow because you have to introduce all the characters and everything, and if I do another read through of Umineko, it's gonna be a little bit tough to get through that because I know all the characters and everything, but I'm sure I will like spot things in hindsight that I couldn't have known. But once the murders start happening, holy cow, like I was absolutely hooked. And I liked that it was a good amount of mystery with that sprinkle of fantasy before it went into full-blown fantasy, that kept things a little bit more grounded and just really had me wanting to know what was like, who was going to die next, how they were going to die, if I was going to be able to figure things out. And then the ending with like Maria in the room just singing was just like such a eerie, creepy, such a cool moment before like everybody died. So yes, those are my favorite episodes, episode 5, episode 7, and I also love episode 1. Least favorite episode is episode 4. Alright, the second question is, what did you think of the game shift between the murder mystery at the beginning to full-blown fantasy by the end? So I mentioned it just in the previous question about how I liked episode 1 because it was kind of like the least amount of fantasy. There was like hints of it where you're trying to figure out like how these murders happen, and then there's this talk about this witch Beatrice. Episode 2 went in a full blown like, all of a sudden Beatrice is there at the beginning, and the all the fantasy creatures showing up, and like the characters having magical abilities. That really kind of took me off guard a little bit between episode 1 and episode 2. And I have to say, at first, I did find it a little frustrating with episode 2 because episode 1 was more grounded in reality, and episode 2 just went balls to the wall like fantasy. So I had a hard time like trying to pick apart like what was happening, and I know that's the point because I knew it wasn't going to be a straightforward murder mystery because of Higurashi. I knew that there was going to be more to it, but it did feel like a real big whiplash between episode 1 and 2, and I found it frustrating because I was like, I'm approaching this as a murder mystery and all the stuff is getting in the way, and I'm just like, how am I supposed to figure out what's going on? But of course, as time went on, I came to appreciate it more. But yes, I did like the answer chapters because we did get, answers and showing how the murders occurred, but I did still appreciate like the fantasy elements. And then as I just kind of like accepted them, I started to get really like hyped about it, like the really cool witch battles and those moments where I knew it wasn't actually happening. But it was still a lot of fun to just kind of like turn my brain off and just enjoy the show. But yes, like knowing now what the fantasy represents, I appreciate it more, but I won't lie. Like when it first started popping up, it did frustrate me a little bit because I was still approaching it as a more straightforward like murder mystery. All right, so another question is, what were your most emotional moments? And I mean, come on, it's really hard to narrow it down. I see emotional as like, for me, more sad or bittersweet moments, but emotional can also be like really hype moments as well. But I think I'm gonna focus more on like sadder or like, yeah, just more upsetting moments maybe. I've got them written down here just so I can remember because I do have a few of them. So the first one was like the end of chapter 5 when Badler learns the truth. And then just as he realizes it, Beatrice is already gone, and then he, breaks down and calls her like an idiot or a fool or something, and why didn't she stick around? Like he finally learned what she was trying to tell him, and then there was the moment before where like she was trying to stick around, and then she was just like, Badler, you idiots, you didn't figure it out in time, or something like that. It was just a really emotional moment where it just felt like he had that epiphany, but then the person that he wanted to tell was already gone at that point, and then it just felt very hopeless. But then there was like the epic post episode 5 contents that kind of made up for it. Another really hard-hitting one was the moment, I believe it was chapter 4, where like Kasumi, she's reading Maria's diary to Angie, and we learn where her like Maria's ooh sound comes from and like what it means. Where she said that it was like I believe it was an incantation or like a spell so that her and her mother would be friends forever, or that her mom would love her, and just like knowing how Maria used that to kind of like try and get closer to her mother, and knowing how much Rosa hated that sound and like punished her for it and screamed at her, and just basically any moment where Rosa was abusive to Maria, because yeah, child abuse stuff, it's not cool with me. I don't like it. It upsets me. It's like in Higurashi with anything with Sadako and her uncle. It just like, it really affected me. And episode 4 especially, like that one was really rough, going through Maria's diary and just seeing just how bad it was, and how Maria like all this time still loved her mother so much. So that was quite a hard moment to watch. And then, of course, the most recent one was the end of episode or chapter 8 with Angie and Hachijo Toya's conversation, where we learn why Hachijo / Badler didn't reach out to her, learning everything that happened to him afterwards. That was like a bittersweet moment where it's like they finally got to be together again, but she's upset with him because he knew for years that she was, like who she was, and never reached out because of all the stuff he was dealing with. And then we get that really sweet moment at the end with the Halloween party where Badler is greeted by his family again in Beatrice, and just and also shout out to the boats moments with Beatrice and Badler, where she throws herself off the boats and Badler tries to save her. But they had that moments beforehand. So basically just the end of chapter 8 was very emotional. Also just knowing that the story was over. Similar moments, like situation to the end of Higurashi, where this like story that I've been so invested in for like 2 years was coming to an end, and that was tough. It felt a little bit empty after. So that's why it's kind of nice for me to be able to talk about this afterwards, because it has been on my mind since it's been done. So it's nice to be able to continue on and be able to talk to you guys about it rather than just kind of stewing on my own, because I don't really talk to anybody outside. Like, nobody I know in my real life has played Umineko, or knows about it, other than maybe my husband, but I can't talk to him about it. Are you kidding? Like, he has no idea. If I tried to talk to him about it, he would have no idea what's going on. So also the end of episode 6, this was kind of more of a hype moment, I think. This was a moment where I was emotional, not because like I was sad or anything, because it was a big aha moment. The end of episode 6 with Erica, when Beato and Badler deliver like that final red truth where they say, even if we include you, there are 17 people, saying that there's only 16 people on the island. That was a super hype moment because that felt like a big clue. Like the story was giving me something to work with. And that was such an awesome moment. A small moment that a lot of people might kind of not think about when they talk about emotional moments, but when Angie called Ava mom for the first time, if you like listen to me read that, like I get a little choked up, because just knowing how much Angie despised Ava for most of her life and blamed her for everything and pushed her away. And that was that moment where it felt like she was healing, where she finally accepted Ava, and like Ava's reaction to it was just like, that was a really good moment. The trial in chapter 5 with Natsui, just like episode 5 was basically just Natsui just getting slandered. But that whole trial where like everybody was against her and she was trying so hard to defend herself, and like Badler trying to help her. Natsui's not my favorite character. I've definitely come to appreciate her more. She's definitely a more complex character than when I started reading it. But even if Natsui's not my favorite character, that moment really made me feel for her, where she has lost everybody and she's just being slandered by her family. It was just really rough, really rough. And then, of course, like pretty much all of the moments of chapter 7 when you learn about Beatrice or Sayo, like their true, like their upbringing, the horrible things that happened to them, like with Kinzo, and just being forgotten about, or feeling like they got forgotten about by Badler, and dealing with their situation. It was just, man, what a sad character. So that was pretty rough to read through. Next question is, how much did you enjoy Umineko in comparison to the expectations you had when you first started after finishing Higurashi? So, like I said, I kind of knew going into Umineko that it was not going to be a straightforward, like, mystery story, but the first chapter had me a little bit fooled about just how much the fantasy was going to play into effect, whereas I feel like Higurashi did a good job at kind of, like, I don't know, dividing the supernatural, because it didn't blatantly show stuff like witch battles and things like that, and goats and people, getting blades out and using magic. It's funny, whereas like Higurashi, kind of towards the end, it definitely went that way with like Hanyu and everything. So there were moments there, but I feel like I accepted it a little bit better because it was towards the end where all that stuff happening, where, like I mentioned before with Umineko, from episode 1 to 2, it was just like such a drastic change in the amount of fantasy. So I think that threw me off, where Higurashi, like, it was more of a slow burn with the supernatural and with like ghosts, and like Rika having, being able to like predict the future, or knowing what was going to happen because she's looped. I don't know, it just felt like the pacing was a little bit better for those reveals, whereas Umineko was a little bit quicker of a turnover. So I kind of knew what I was going into, but at the same time I didn't. And I'll talk about my opinions about Umineko versus Higurashi, but Higurashi prepared me a little bit, but at the same time, it's still like Umineko caught me off guard with how much they delved into the fantasy so quickly. All right, next question is there anything you would add, remove, or change about the visual novel? So based on the little of the manga that I've read, for like extra stuff about like, for example, the manga version of episode 8, and I read, what was it I read? I read something between episode 7 and 8, where it went into more detail about stuff. There were some pretty important things that were left out of the visual novel that were in the manga, and this was just based on like the part of one chapter that I read and then part of another chapter that I read. Like specifically the aftermath of all the murders and like Beato and Badler like meeting up with each other and escaping onto the boat. Like in the visual novel, it just cuts to all of a sudden they're down in like in the underground area getting on the boat, but in the manga they showed like what happened to Badler after finding everybody, finding all the bodies, and then running into Beatrice, and then Beatrice confessing that they were kind of behind everything and who they were, and like none of that was in the visual novel. So that makes me think, I'm like, what the heck what the heck is in the manga that I also have not read yet? So I'm thinking maybe for Patreon exclusive, hint hint, in the future, I might do, maybe instead of a reread of Umineko, I might read through the manga instead, because I might learn even more information. Because I'm probably missing a whole bunch of context and extra things that weren't in the visual novel, which is wild considering how long the visual novel is. So that was something that, like, I know it would have made the visual novel longer, but yeah, I felt like there was some stuff that I really would have liked to have seen that, and I wouldn't have even known it existed until I read the manga. Also, I did like during the Halloween party where they had the riddle section where I could actually interact with the game more. And I don't know how it would have worked in the context of the visual novel in any other point, but I wish we could have had more moments like that, because it felt like I was more involved with the story. But like I said, the story itself it's hard to do moments like this with Umineko compared to other visual novels because you can't really change moments because it's kind of set in stone. But it would have just been more fun to have like moments like that where I could have interacted with and made choices, even if it was a little like side thing, like the Halloween party didn't really, like the riddles were just kind of a fun thing. But it's funny because like you've been kind of trying to figure out all of these riddles beforehand, and the Halloween party was kind of like a culmination of that in a more fun way. So I would have liked more involved, interactive moments in the visual novel. So I couldn't think of anything I would have removed or anything else I can think about changing. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I can't say anything else that I could complain about that I didn't like about the visual novel. All right, what were some of my favorite tracks? This was tough because I don't think there is one bad song. I was really thinking. I listened to the soundtrack again to try and pick my songs, and I don't think there was any songs that I didn't like. They're all bangers. So it was really hard. So I divided up into a couple of different categories. So like the hype tracks that would usually happen during fight moments, or like just really cool moments of like maybe solving like the riddles and like closed rooms and stuff. So my hype tracks were World End Dominator, Mirage Coordinator, and Dream End Discharger. I love Golden Slaughter because it was always like whenever a body was found. So that's like a real hype moment in itself. It was just like that tension of like, oh, who's going to be dead this time? How do they die? What's going to happen? Oh, here's something not necessarily about the visual novel. I wish YouTube was better about letting me be able to play songs and not have to alter them, because I love Golden Slaughter, but I feel like it's been kind of tinged a little bit because I just remember every time I had Golden Slaughter playing, YouTube would throw a fit about it. And there was always like certain songs where that would happen, but Golden Slaughter was one where I'm like, every time it got copyright claims. So I feel like it's been kind of like, it's an awesome song, but I have some like negative connotations because of that. And then for emotional tracks, my two big emotional tracks were Thanks for Being Born and Thanks for All the People. Those would always happen during kind of like sad moments or during like uplifting moments. So yeah, those were like the tracks that always kind of like get me a little like, oh, this is gonna be a really sweet moment or a really sad moment. All right, I like this question is which witch had the best drip? All of the witches looked pretty good, but if I had to narrow it down, I would say I liked Gap because she just looked so different from everybody else. She really stood out and it was just very her. I liked Angie's. I feel like if I were a witch, her style is probably the one that I would want to wear the most because it's like a little bit more subdued, also very her. Beato, just classic. Love that dress. She just looks awesome. Badler, I guess he's not a witch, is he? He's a game. No, he's a game master. He's not a witch. But I gotta give a shout out because I love the cape. He looked really good. So, also bonus point for Erica's pirate hat. I like specifically Erica's little pirate getup was very cute. So, I will give her an honorable mention. All right, speaking of characters, who are my favorite and least favorite characters? My favorite characters, pretty easy. So, it might not be too much of a shocker. Beatrice, Badler, Angie, Ava, and Will. Badler and Beatrice, pretty self-explanatory. They're just awesome characters, and they had the most like kind of screen time, so it was really easy to like them. Beatrice, I wasn't a big fan of her at first. I found her a little obnoxious, but of course, the more events go on, you sympathize with her more, especially when you learn her backstory and why she's doing this. So she definitely became a favorite character. Angie, she was just a very sympathetic character, and I just felt for her, and she was just kind of like a mix of like just this cool teenager, maybe a little bit like too cool for you, maybe trying a little bit too hard to be like, I don't know, she was just a little bit aloof, which understandably, but then as you like, she's another one who had a lot of character progression, and then she allowed herself to open up more and be vulnerable, so I just really liked her. Ava was another character where I thought she was a cool character, but I had my moments where she kind of annoyed me, like especially her being like cruel to Natsui. But like once you learn more about her and like, you know, all the stuff that happened with Angie, and then I started to not like her as much, especially when I thought that she might have been the culprit, and then you learn more about her, and then she became sympathetic as well. And Will, most surface level, you don't know too much about him. He's just a cool character. He's attractive. He's not a witch, is he? He's got some good drip, though. He's a very stylish character. I feel like he's one of the more stylish characters overall. He's just cool. He has cat. He likes cats. He saves Leon, has a sword, is good with it, attractive, good drip, nice voice. It's very shallow, but I like him for that reason. Now, least favorite characters, there were no characters that I hated. Similar to the songs, like, they were characters that maybe I didn't have much of an attachment to, because they were kind of background characters, or they just didn't really stand out, so I don't think there are any characters. And I will say George is on the list. I don't hate George. I think of all of the family, he's the one that I like the least. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to the George fans out there, but I don't hate him. I guess Nanjo is another one that was just like a meh character. Goda, and also I'm still upset with Goda about like fucking up the thing at the end in the Golden Land where he screwed everything up. Zephyr and Furu, I guess I just found them kind of annoying and they didn't really do much. Also, I'm saying characters who have like actual sprites. So I could say like background characters like, I don't know, the dickhead that Kinzo was dealing with, who started killing everybody during the flashback when he was a soldier. But I'm going with people who have sprites. And I guess if I have to like narrow down to my, like if I'm going with top 5, least 5, I guess the bunny girl with the pink hair, is it Chester001 or I don't even know. I just didn't really like her voice, and I liked the other girl because she said yeah, and she was kind of cute, and I liked her voice. So I guess between the two, I disliked the one with the pink hair a little bit more. But like I said, none of these characters are characters that I hate. I just find them just like kind of mid. So there you go. All right, which character did you change your opinion on most throughout the story? The top one has to be Beatrice, Sayo, Shannon, Kanon, Yasu. I guess would they all be considered separate characters? Like, just that whole bundle of person. If you want to say, like, Beatrice, because, like I said, I just found her a little obnoxious, and I was like with Badler, like, I'm like, why is she doing this? She's so cruel. She's just mocking him as she kills his family. And then as you learn more about why it's happening, you become sympathetic to her. And I just really hated her in that moment. Was it chapter 3 where, like, she acted like she was kind of coming around, and then with Vergalia, and then there was that heel turn right at the end. I was like, this bitch. But now I love her. I think she's a great character. And like I said, same thing with Ava. I feel like I've changed my mind about almost every character throughout the story. Like there's people that I've been kind of like, I thought they were good characters all throughout, like that I just seemed like nice characters, like Jessica, Hideyoshi, just like character like Kraus was just like, they were just kind of like, they didn't really change very much. Like my opinion didn't go up or down. Very rarely were there characters like from the beginning to the end where I actually didn't like them as much. If anything, usually the characters, I like them more by the end because we learn more about them. I was side-eyeing like Kyrie a little bit. She was one, like maybe my opinion of her went down a little bit. Same with like Rudolph, where I thought they were just like this cool power couple and they were cool and cute together. And then learning what they were capable of, I was like, whoa. I was like, I feel like Kyrie felt like she had it in her, but like Rudolph was just like, ooh. I guess Ava too. Ava would be up there. And yeah, like I said, very rarely did my opinion of a character go down the more I learned about them. If anything, I sympathized with them. And that's what this story is so good at, is just making you, even if you don't agree with the characters and what they do, you kind of understand from their point of view why they did it. All right, favorite battle in the series. This is tough. Man, almost every battle was super hype. I mentioned it, I gotta say, the whole, like, the entirety of, like, the post chapter 5, question mark, that battle with Badler against Delanor and Erica. Oh, that was amazing. So good. So good. Was that the one where he pulled out the golden truth, the golden blade? It's hard, like, I get them all mixed up. Was that chapter 5 or 6? Either way, that whole battle was just so epic. It was great. And I also liked the love trial battle with Jessica and George versus Gap and Ronave. That one was a really awesome one too. I really liked the kind of like the zipping back and forth between them. And it seemed like, first it seemed like, oh no, Jessica and George have no chance, but oh, they're doing something and now they're going to come out on top, and like, oh no, and it doesn't end well for them. But it was a really hype battle, and it just kind of had me on the edge of my seat. Another one I really liked was the chapter 8, the final battle in the Golden Land, because like almost every character got like a cool moment and a cool CG. Like, shout out, I think the coolest one I liked is like Rosa and Maria. That CG where she's got the gun and Maria's just like, they're doing like that kind of back to back, and I'm just like, oh my god, it was so hype. And also knowing that it was like coming towards the end of the story, and it just felt like this is the moment where like they're gonna do it. So I don't think there was any battles that were like bad ones. They were all really good. Those are just kind of ones that stood out to me. All right, so where would you rank Umineko in terms of the visual novels you've played? I would say it's definitely in the top 5 for sure. Higurashi, I think, is my number 1, and is going to be my number 1. It's going to be very hard to top it. Love Higurashi so much. Would you consider Phoenix Wright? Would you consider that a visual novel? Considering that there's a lot of gameplay. If you do, Phoenix Wright is somewhere in the top 3, specifically Trials and Tribulations. That's my favorite one of the Phoenix Wright ones. You and Me and Her is also one in the top 5. Danganronpa, if that's considered a visual novel as well, that's going to be specifically Goodbye Despair. That's also... So I would say like Umineko probably ranks about 4 or 5. So it's in my top 5 for sure, but I definitely liked Higurashi more. And the final question is, what is your takeaway message from the story? Oh, there's so much that you could take away from this, but I think the thing I think about, it's similar to Higurashi, which is just... It's a simple thing. It's just communication. Just communicate with people. Talk with people. If you have like something that's bugging you, reach out. instead of bundling it all in, because it just doesn't end well when people do that, especially like in regard. And I know it's hard. Like, it's hard for in certain situations for certain people. God knows that I can be guilty of that too. But like with Sayo, you know, if they just, I don't know, maybe talk to Badler sooner instead of having him try and figure everything out. If Badler had maybe talked to Sayo a little bit more instead of making big promises. I guess that's another thing too, is the things that you say to people can have a lasting impression and can affect them in ways you would never even realize, for better or for worse. So just take care with what you say to people, and communication. Just talk to people and don't bundle it in. Don't hold it in. I guess that's my takeaway. I'm sure there's a more grand thing that you guys probably took away from it. Leave them down in the comments. I want to know, like, the questions that I have asked. I want to know what your opinions are on them. I want to know what, like, your answers would be to these questions. But yeah, like the Umineko and Higurashi, it's that similar thing about that, where it's just like, just talk to people, rely on your friends, just, yeah, talk to each other, reach out to your friends. If you feel like something's bug, you know, if you think that maybe they're feeling a little bit off, or like, I don't know, you feel like something might be going on with them, instead of waiting for them to reach out to you, try reaching out to them and just try not to hold it in, and just try and find somebody to talk to, I guess would be the big takeaway from both of those stories. So yeah, that is going to do it for me for my Umineko Q&A. Thank you guys so much for all of the questions you sent me. I'm sorry there was a lot. I got so many. I was so overwhelmed with the amount of questions, but I had to pick, you know, just a small selection. Otherwise, this would go on forever. I'm sure you guys wouldn't have minded that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed my little Q&A post, you know, Umineko video. But we're not done yet. The Umineko is not done yet, because I just can't seem to get away from this, because I have been told by multiple people that there is a special, like, post-game chapter. And if I can get it to work, I have to see if I can download it. I've forgotten the name. Let me just look it up really quick. All right, so it is called The Last Note of the Golden Witch. So it's an extra arc. So I'm going to do my best to see if I can get it downloaded, because apparently there may be some issues. If anything, if I can't get it to work, there is a YouTube video with the entirety of it, so I can always just react to it. But I'm going to try and get it downloaded. And it seems like it's going to be a pretty short one. I could probably do it in either one super long episode or 2 separate episodes, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to react to that next week. So for those of you who are sad that Umineko is ending, not quite yet. And then there is still Golden Fantasia, which is the fighting game, which I might just do little bits here and there, just like trying it out. So there is going to be more Umineko content, so don't worry about that. But of course, after all that, I will be getting back to Higurashi and reading Higurashi again. So I hope you guys are excited for the things that are coming down the pipeline. Thank you again for your questions. I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned next week for that extra chapter. Until then, bye guys.